That's the task of why we were brought down here. We need to master the ability to learn how to love, but yet it's the most difficult task. So greatness to me is someone that has mastered the ability to love.
And welcome to yet another installment of Behind Greatness by Inspire. It is Luciano as your host speaking as usual. Before we get into it with Ray here again, want to, of course, remind the listener, if you are an old listener and an old friend of ours on the other side of this, thank you. And thank you if you have rated us and if you have shared with your family and friends. And if you haven't, don't be shy. This is what we want to do. And if you're listening in, it's probably the case on your end, wanting to listen. So please share the love. If you're a new listener, please do the same. The ask is no different, except one difference, actually, is if this is your first time listening, do not listen to this episode before you listen to last week's episode with Ray. So we rarely have a continuation, a part two. This is a part two to a conversation that we started last week with Ray. You will not get the full context unless you listen to last week's. So I implore you to do that. And in the last note, again, we are a registered charity, not for profit. We accept donations. We issue tax receipts, obviously, as a charity. If you like what we're doing, we all volunteer doing this. By all means, and just go to our website, behindgreatness.org. All right, let's go straight into this. So we have Rey Hernandez back on, and Ray and I had a very, very interesting chat last week. Ray has had an extraordinary 12 years of his life. Can I call it, is it 12, 11? Yeah, 12. Let's call it 12, more or less. Earth-shaking experiences. And we were right in the thick of it when we decided to make it to be continued. So here we are back again. As I mentioned to the listener, please, for Ray's background and his bio and whatever, at the beginning of last episode, because we're going to jump right in back with 2 feet into the deep end where we were swimming last time. Ray, again, welcome back.
Thank you for the invitation again.
Our pleasure, and you know that. Okay, so we were just finishing discussing and listening to you describe your third large experience. We had peppered the conversation, of course, with other things like free and other names of people that a listener can listen to as well. And we were just about to talk about your fourth experience, the so-called fourth large experience that you had in, was it December of 2012 or early 2013?
I think we discussed that December 2012 event that gave me spirituality.
Yes.
And then the next major experience was an out-of-body experience while I was in my car that led to the formation of the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation within 48 hours of that experience.
So we learned about the Free Foundation as a reminder to the listener through Diana Pasolka's book, American Cosmic, where she spent quite a bit of time talking about your experiences or writing about your experiences, obviously. And that's what got us hooked into what, not only what you experienced, but then what you started to build around you with other like minds and minds that had been swimming in this environment for much longer than you had at the time. So anyway, I want to give that as background. So that's what the free is. We'll go into free in a few minutes. So bring us to the experience, to your experience in the car.
Between December, the previous experience I had of 2012, and May, this is the first week of May of 2013, I had been having various paranormal experiences, which we just don't have enough time to detail here. Let me set this up by saying that in November of 2012, I was in a state of desperation because I thought I was going crazy. Just to remind the listeners here, I went for a master's at Cornell University, PhD at University of California, Berkeley. I was an IRS tax attorney for many, many years and had zero knowledge or experiences in this arena. And then all of a sudden it was like nonstop. And so I knew that I
You were
wasn't.
also a materialist and an atheist.
Oh yes, a pure atheist, a pure materialist, and I knew that I wasn't going crazy because my wife was having these experiences, and then my daughter was a witness to that sighting of that huge UAP outside of our home, and she was next to me when her pediatrician told her about her own NDE, the details of her own NDE. So my daughter became a part of this phenomenon. And so, but in October, I sent the letter out to 10 famous names in the field of ufology, because I knew that this was UFO related because of the UFO I had called down, the UFOs that my wife was calling down. And it was just a state of sheer desperation trying to talk to someone that can give me some help. So now I only got two responses. One was from Whitley Strieber, and the other one was from Grant Cameron. And both of the emails were like, this is all very real. You're not going crazy. Just hang in there. That's something very, very brief. And so in May of 2013, the first week of May of 2013, I was going to work in the federal government building in downtown Miami at 8:30 in the morning. I all of a sudden, in the middle of a traffic jam near the airport, Miami airport, all of a sudden, I was not in my car. I had been listening to an interview on a public radio station of this man doing a documentary on his liposuction. He was doing art fat sculptures, which is a really weird interview. And I was like fascinated because it was just so weird. And all of a sudden, I'm not in my car anymore. Everything was all black. I had no idea what had just happened. And now I realized that it was my consciousness was taken out of my body. I was outside of space and time. And all of a sudden, that darkness, I began to see that I was inside this huge, gigantic cart. I was in the middle of the cart, called the fulcrum of it. And I was looking outward. It was very, very huge. And each section of the cart had a video in it. And I was getting downloaded telepathic communications, not words, but it was pure information. And I realized that one was, for example, the topic of UFOs. Another one was the topic of near-death experiences. Another one was the topic of out-of-body experiences. Another one was the topic of shamanic hallucinogenic journeys. Another one was the topic was communication with ghosts and spirits and seeing physical, ghosts and spirits. Another one was remote viewing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All these concepts, I later gave it the term, the contact modalities, based upon this experience. So let me continue with this. I was inside watching these videos, and as it was moving around in a clock circle way, all this information about what that phenomenon was all about was entering my mind. And so I knew the details of all of that information. And then after it finished doing that, then it relayed a message to me. The message was that these are all the different ways that humans are piercing the veil of your physical reality. And humans are studying them as separate and distinct phenomena. But in fact, what they are one integrated phenomenon. And the glue, that's the word that they use, the glue that's holding it all together, humans are calling it consciousness. But in fact, what it is the fabric of our reality. So that was the message that was being conveyed to me. As I was receiving all this information and watching these videos, I was totally confused. I was totally puzzled. I didn't even realize that I was in another reality because I wasn't thinking that way. I was just thinking on focusing on what was in front of me or what I was experiencing.
This is while you were in the car in traffic.
Yes, in the car in traffic. And And then I was communicated instructions of what I needed to do. It said, you need to inform humanity of the relationship between us, the spirit world, and consciousness. Now, I had no idea what that was, okay? As I was getting that information, I wasn't able to decipher it. But now I understand that us means the mind of God, that we are all part of God, a non-religious God, okay? There's no separation. We are all one. So that's the word, us, okay? The spirit world conveys the fact that once we, as individuated units of consciousness, when we die, we go back to the mind of God. We join the mind of God like a neuron in a brain. We return back to the brain, okay? And then consciousness is the mechanism, the fabric, the whole mechanics of how it works. The journey of the human soul. And I describe that in my book, The Mind of God, which is available for free for anyone.
And we'll put that to the show in the show notes too.
Yeah.
So quick interruption on this. When you mentioned the spirit world and that we join the mind of God, you mentioned reincarnation briefly. We didn't talk about it too much. Your ideas on reincarnation. Where does that play into it? Why is it if reincarnation exists? And so that's actually the first question to you. If it exists, why is it that we reincarnate? Why don't we stay within the mind of God, or why don't we enjoy our time in the mind of God?
Well, I was not given a message about reincarnation during that experience. But I will say that I'm very close friends with many of the leading NDE researchers. Dr. Jeffrey Long, medical doctor oncologist, has written 2 major books on near-death experiences. He has a website that he's had for over 25 years that has more than 10,000 experiences of NDE experiencers. And Jeffrey also has the hypothesis that, yes, reincarnation is very real and it does exist. I also have several articles by 2 academics that are professors at the University of Virginia School of Medicine. That is Dr. Bruce Grayson, who's one of the pioneers. I would say he was the leading academic pioneer on near-death experiences. He started researching this phenomenon in 1976 after he met Dr. Raymond Moody, who was the resident in his own department, the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Virginia. And Dr. Moody had shown him hundreds of letters that he had gotten after he published his book, Life After Life, in 1975. And he says, look, I just can't respond to all these people. I'm a resident of psychiatry in your department. He says, would you like to follow up on some of these? And that's how Dr. Bruce Grayson got hooked, okay? Now, a colleague of his, the person that started the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia, Dr. Ian Stevenson, always had an interest in reincarnation since the very early 1960s. He wound up, before his death, publishing over 2,900 academic research studies of individuals that had reincarnation. And before he died, he clearly understood that reincarnation, the phenomenon of reincarnation, exists.
Yeah.
Him being a hardcore academic, he really didn't have explanations or responses to the questions that you had asked, as to why. And also, Dr. Bill Tucker also wrote an article in our book, A Greater Reality. I believe it was volume 1, together with Dr. Bruce Grayson and Dr. Jim Tucker. Dr. Tucker followed up on the academic research of Dr. Ian Stevenson. Mm-hmm. Dr. Stevenson selected him to continue with his work on reincarnation. And Dr. Tucker has published, I believe, 2 books on the topic of reincarnation. And finally, I would say that Dr. Eben Alexander, who was a professor of neurosurgery at the Harvard Medical School, he had a major NDE back in 2012, I believe it was.
Yep.
And he also firmly accepts the hypothesis that reincarnation exists. And so this is a professor at the Harvard Medical School of neurosurgery, a professor of the brain. So if all these brilliant geniuses and many, many, many others believe in the concept of reincarnation, including almost all of the members of our organization, the Consciousness and Contact Research Institute, then yes, I also hypothesize that it exists in terms of these fundamental questions, in terms of, why certain individuals, why certain people are allowed to remember, others are not. What I can say is that the NDE literature, many, many hundreds of individuals have been allowed, were shown, I should say, their past lives. Okay. And some of them, their future lives. So this is all documented in the NDE literature. But in order to answer some of these profound questions that you asked, we just don't have responses to those yet.
I think the key is that there are people they have been seriously studying this scientifically, not just anecdotally, for decades. So you mentioned Bruce Grayson. We've had him on the show. Jim Tucker, we're going to be having him. Eben Alexander is a curiosity for us. So thank you for sharing those and reminding us here. But there is something about the year 2012. In my own personal and professional life, 2012 was a kind of a shift for me. One of those years there was a shift. But I've taken note. I never really took notice of that, me personally, until I started to speak to some of our guests who mentioned 2012. Dana Pasolka is one of them. You're another. And there was another recent guest. There was something happened in 2000. I wonder, this is just a side comment, if there is something to that year, 2012. Anyway.
I believe there is. For me personally, that was when I had my very first experience with that energy being in my living room that totally healed, performed the miraculous medical healing of our dog, who was totally paralyzed.
That was a crazy year for you.
Yes,
that whole year.
And then in December 21st, 2012, which someone pointed out to me, Ray, do you realize the significance of that date? And I said, no, I don't. I said, well, that supposedly is the date of the Mayan calendar, which I still don't understand the full, consequences of that. But that was the first date that my daughter's pediatrician mentioned to us of her NDE.
Yeah, you gave us that story.
Yeah, and so, and then the next 3 days, the next three people, next two additional people I mentioned it, all of them had an NDE. And it was on the end of the third day, which was my father confessing to me his NDE. That's when I began to speak to God, for the first time, and understand that that I am an eternal spiritual being. So that year was profoundly important for me. And I know for other individuals that I've spoken with as well, they've had major experiences that year as well. So I think it was the year of the awakening of humanity. That's what I think.
I wonder. Yeah. Well, certainly with your story, that's true. Certainly for your story, but maybe it's a question I need to ask a little bit more actively with people about 2012. So, okay, it is a long interruption, but let's go back to you just very quickly, you in the car again. So you had this download, you're given this message, and then you just kind of open your eyes and you're in your car again. How did that work? What was the transition?
Okay. After that message of what I needed to do, which I didn't understand it at all. It was
just going to work.
Later on, I did understand what it meant. But all of a sudden, it continued, and it said, "This is not about you making, money off of this. This is not a capitalist venture." And that wasn't the word that they used. But this is not for you to become wealthy off of this. And it said you will also need assistance. You'll need help, and the people that are going to be helping you have to be people with minimal ego. And once that concept of minimal ego finished, I was right back in my car listening to that man doing his interview of the liposuction and the documentary he was doing. And I realized that at that point was that I was taken outside of space and outside of time, because not 1 second had passed in my experience, but yet the experience was perceived to be between 25 minutes to 30 minutes. And
So that's what it felt like. It felt
that's
that
what
long.
it felt like. That's what it felt like. And
Wow.
and so I'm back in the car, and I was freaking out. I was hyperventilating, and I was like, what just happened? And then when I got to work, I was there for 4 hours. I couldn't do any work at all. I was just thinking of that experience over and over again. And I said, screw it, I'm going home, And so I went home. And then later on that afternoon, late afternoon, I got an email from Mary Rodwell. And the email said, Dear Ray, I'm sorry that I'm responding to your email that you had sent back in October at this time, but it just popped up on my computer today. And so I sent her back a response, and I said, well, you ain't seen nothing yet. Over the last 6 months since October, these are all the things that have happened. And this is what happened today. And I gave all
So you
the
wrote
details.
that all out for her, right?
Correct. And this is what happened today.
Wow.
And so then later on that evening, I got a response back from Mary. And she said, oh, my God, Ray, we need to talk. We need to talk. And so she showed me how to use Skype. I'd never used Skype before, or Zoom or any of those things. But at that time, Skype was the main
it was Skype. It's number one
format. And so she showed me how to use. And then I spoke to her to like 1:30 in the morning, my time, Eastern Standard Time. And so she was like totally fascinated by my experiences. And then we agreed to continue our conversations, the very next day.
For the listener, Mary Rodwell was on about a month ago on our podcast, so they can search her up too. So when you say Mary, they have a context. Sorry, go ahead, Ray.
Mary has worked with more than 3,000 UFO contact experiencers, mainly because for many people, I would say the majority of the people, there's an ontological shock associated with these experiences.
Sure.
Like all of my experiences have been positive, but you freak out because, taken to alternate realities, you see an energy being in your living room. The dog that you were going to be totally euthanizing is totally healed. Seeing UFOs that you call down right in front of you, less than 30 feet away, et cetera, et cetera. And so that really can lead you into a nervous breakdown, even though these experiences are not negative, and so Mary.
So that didn't happen to you. You continued your quest, so to speak. Is that right?
Well, I continued with my experiences. I didn't even know I had a quest. It was only until after that particular experience. And so, but let me talk about the details afterwards that happened.
Yeah.
The very next day at 9:30 in the morning, I got a phone call, and I only went to work 1 day a week, and so the rest of the week I was staying at home. And so I got a phone call, and hello, is this Rey Hernandez? I said, yes. Who's this? Dr. Rudy Schild. I said, who? Oh, Mary didn't tell you I was going to give you a call? No, she didn't. So Rudy Schild is an emeritus professor of astrophysics at the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, one of the world's leading physicists and astrophysicists in the world. His expertise was black holes. He had written several papers stating that Stephen Hawking had been wrong about black holes. Then several years later, Hawking did publish new papers saying he had been completely wrong about black holes, but he didn't give credit to Rudy Schild, pointing out his deficiencies. So just to let you know the genius of this man.
Rudy Schild does not have an ego, is what we've understood.
No. He's a brilliant man, super kind man. And then he was a very dear friend of the late Dr. John Mack. He was a professor at the Harvard Medical School. He was a psychiatrist. And he had written 2 books about the UFO contactee phenomenon. And his last book was his most important book, Passport to the Cosmos. And that was published in 1999. And Rudy was the only academic that stood up to defend publicly Dr. Mack. He had like an inquisition, before the Harvard institution. And so that's when Rudy first became interested in these topics, because Dr. Mack had asked him, I said, Rudy, all these people are coming to me. They're telling me that they were brought from other realities, to other dimensions, that they're being visited from, visitors from other realities. Is it true that there might be other dimensions, other realities? And Rudy said, of course, and told him the whole physics behind it all. And that's how they became close friends. So anyway, this man was calling me at 9:30 in the morning. And then while I was talking to him, I was checking my emails, and I saw that there was an email from Mary Rodwell saying, Ray, do I have your permission to send our discussions to Rudy so he can talk to you? So Rudy jumped the gun and he called me instead. And I said, okay, it was Mary that did send the email, but I just hadn't gotten around to reading it. And so he says, oh, great. Can I ask you several questions? And I said, of course. So he began to ask me about my experiences. And he had been working with Mary. And Mary had referred to him individuals that had gotten downloads of advanced physics.
You were talking to individuals.
She had been working with Rudy Schild.
Oh, okay.
Individuals that Mary had worked with that had gotten downloads of advanced physics, advanced mathematics, or even topics of consciousness. Okay,
which I'm understanding is much more common than is ever reported.
Well, in our survey, later on we'll discuss the Free Foundation research survey. There were 32% of the people had gotten downloads of advanced mathematics or advanced physics, or technologies, advanced technologies, that they just had no way of getting that information, of knowing what that information was. So that was exactly what Rudy was researching and studying. So I told him everything that happened, all of my previous experiences and the experience that occurred the day before. And then he said, Ray, what you got was a download of Dr. Edgar Mitchell's quantum hologram theory of consciousness, which I won't attempt to describe at this point. You can go to volume 1 of our book, and you could read it, Edgar's Quantum Hologram Theory of Consciousness, and it's on our website, greaterreality.com. So at that point, Rudy said, he says, write this telephone number down. And I wrote it down. And he says, this is a telephone number of my mentor. So I said, well, who's your mentor? And he goes, Dr. Edgar Mitchell. And so I knew who he was already, because I've been reading lots of books on UFOs and also books on consciousness. And
the fifth or sixth man to walk the moon.
Sixth man to walk on the moon, correct. And he was also the founder of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which is the world's leading academic research institute on ESP and on consciousness. And Dr. Dean Radin, who is a member of our organization as well, he was also he's the lead scientist of ions. And so anyway, Rudy then tells me, he says he will be my scientific advisor for the mission that I was given. And in my mind, I was like, what mission? What is he talking about? He said, no, you were given a clear mission of what you needed to do, blah, blah, blah. And so at that point, I said, okay, I'll give Edgar a call and we'll continue our discussions. And he wanted to continue talking to me, but after he had spoken with Edgar. So what had happened was I waited like 4 hours because I was scared of calling Edgar Mitchell. He was a very, very well-known man. And I was like scared. Should I call him? Should I not? Should I call him? Should I not? And in the meantime, 4 hours later, I gave him a call. Now, mind you, this is the day after that experience, that out-of-body experience. So he calls me, and I called him, and he said he was waiting for my phone call. And what it was that Rudy had given him a call. They spoke for a very long time about my experience. And so Edgar said that Rudy had informed him that I was someone that it was important that he spoke with me. And so he said, what are you doing tomorrow? I said, well, I'm working tomorrow. He says, well, can you take the day off? I said, sure. And he says, he only lived 90 minutes away in Lake Worth, Florida, gave me his address. He said, well, can you make it here at 10 o'clock? And I said, okay, 10 o'clock, I'll be there. So at 10 a.m., I was at Edgar's home. This is literally within 48 hours of me having that out of body experience. Okay.
Yeah. In traffic in Miami, going
in
to work.
traffic and right next to Miami Airport. And then, for the first, I would say maybe 4 or 5 hours, Edgar was just talking about his life.
Sorry, for the first 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah, at Edgar's home. I didn't speak about my experience at all. It was Edgar talking about his life. And he went through all the details. I mean, you ask me anything about Edgar's life, and I'll tell you, he had baby pictures when he was a baby. He even had baby clothes, the actual baby clothes that he wore on the wall. He had pictures that his mother had drawn, very good artistic quality pictures of his home when he was young. He had a story for each one of those pictures, And so he told me that he grew up in Roswell, that he went to high school there, and that when he was young, he learned how to fly airplanes because he worked at the local airport, and the owner of the airport, instead of paying him cash, paid him by flight lessons. So very early on, he knew that he wanted to be a military pilot. So when he went, right before he went to Carnegie Mellon University in Pennsylvania, that's when the newspapers came out of the Roswell incident. And then the next day there was a retraction, so he thought it was nothing of it, but he knew about the event. And when he became an astronaut, came back from the moon, he began a tour in major cities around the U.S. And one speech that he gave was in Roswell. And so he told me a little bit about that, what took place. And that's when he first piqued his interest in UFOs. But what he did tell me was that out in space, he said the majority of the astronauts and the cosmonauts had paranormal experiences in space.
The majority.
He didn't tell me about UFO stuff. He said, no, they didn't see UFOs out in space, but they had various paranormal type of experiences in space. And what happened to him was he had what is now called a samadhi experience, which was an enlightenment experience of knowing everything that a lot of yogis get when they do these deep meditations. All of a sudden, you get this instant knowledge of knowing everything. What near-death experiences call when you join the mind of God, when you die, all of a sudden you know everything. It's like certain truths are hidden from you. And all of a sudden, you know what your past lives are, what your future is going to be, what is the mission here on Earth, what is the mission up there with God. It's like, everything. So Edgar had one of those experiences which lasted very briefly. I don't remember the duration, but it was like seconds. And then all of a sudden, it was like wiped away. And he was like, what the hell just happened? So when he got back down to Earth, he began to do research on it. And it was a professor of religion. I think it was a Near Eastern religion that had studied the Upanishads. He said, Edgar, what you had it's called a samadhi experience, is this heightened state of enlightenment where like you have this instant knowledge of everything. And then it just comes very quickly and then it goes away. And a lot of these yogis over the years, they continue at that higher state of non-local consciousness where they're able to retain a lot of that information. And so anyway, Edgar's telling me all of this and so much more. How most of after he was entered the Air Force, after he finished Carnegie Mellon, he was later on, after he learned how to fly those test pilots, he became a test pilot for Chuck Yeager. And he said that most of the pilots for Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo came from Chuck Yeager's group. And all they did was test airplanes. And so he knew almost all of these astronauts from the Mercury to Gemini and then Apollo. He said they were all close friends. And then he said that NASA sent him to MIT. And MIT was where he learned about the building of the lunar module, because that was where it was being built at MIT via subcontractors and via scientists at MIT. And so while he was doing his PhD work, he was reviewing the lunar module, all all the electronics of it, how it functioned, in and out. So he told me in that Tom Hanks movie of Apollo 13, he said that he was 3 of those people in that movie.
Ah,
Okay,
no, I
because
didn't know that.
he had the most knowledge of the lunar module because he had been there from its being developed conceptually all the way to the very end when it was developed. And so when it had that problem in Apollo 13, they turned to Edgar because they knew, he knew the most of that. And he was right there because Edgar was scheduled to go to the moon on Apollo 14. So anyway, he was telling me all of these that he had won the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and he showed me the plaque for that. He showed
he
me
was a hero, right?
Yeah, he was a hero, a national hero. And so he had told me all about the programs at SRI, the remote viewing.
Russell Targs,
Yeah, how he was, part of that from the very beginning. He was the one that brought in Uri Geller, okay, which is the very first person that he brought in, even before that artist from New York City, I forgot.
Ella Hamid.
No. Who's known as the founder of coordinate remote viewing?
Ingo Swann.
Ingo Swann. Yeah, it was before Swann. So Uri Geller was the first one. So he told me tons of stories of like aports appearing on his physical, clothing that he had lost when he was walking with Uri Geller. One time, one of those tea machines that used to squeeze the tea, to squeeze every little drop of it. I forgot what those are called. Those are heavy. All of a sudden, he's walking with Uri Geller, and here's this flap on his coat pocket. He was like, "What the hell is that? This flap, and it's hard, So he reached in there. Well, he had lost this 2 months ago, And then he had lost a Korean War medal from his brother, like 2 years earlier, and he couldn't find it. And he was so frustrated because that was from his brother, and his brother, I think, was deceased at that time. And so all of a sudden, he's walking with Uri Geller, and he feels this tapping on his breast, right? So he goes into his shirt pocket, and here's the medal of his brother, And so just to let you know some of these weird experiences. So that was like 6 hours of conversation of Edgar telling me about his life from very, very early on till, to the very end. And I won't give you more details because we could be here forever. But then he says, "Okay, Ray, tell me about your experiences, And then I realized he did that way just to put me at ease, because it's like, look, kid, I've been there, done that. I've heard all these crazy things, Now let me hear from you. And I told him. And then he says, look, Rudy and I already discussed it. We volunteer to be your academic scientific advisors for your mission. And I have a group called Quantrack, which is made up over 20 different scientists, mainly physicists, but in different fields as well, that I can get them to help us." And I'm like, is this man crazy? What the hell is he talking about, And so I said, "But Edgar, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do." And so his response was, "Don't worry, it'll come to you. Very soon you'll know what your mission was." Like he already knew, the whole process of it.
It's like a movie.
It was surreal. And so I went home, driving home, thinking Rudy Schild is a crazy nutcase. Edgar Mitchell is even crazier than him. What the hell is going on in my life, And these things happen like one after the other within, 48 hours. And what the hell is going on? Am I going even deeper into this crevice of craziness, And so that Saturday morning when I woke up and I had a whole outline of what we needed to do. And let me explain it for you, okay? And I immediately went to the computer to type it out because I didn't want to forget it. And what it was that if all of the contact modalities are interrelated, okay, near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, UFOs, ghosts and spirits, hallucinogenic journeys, remote viewing, channeling, et cetera, all the different ways that humans are piercing the veil of our reality and having contact with non-human intelligence. If all of them are interrelated, well, we have lots of data on near-death experiences because that research had been going on since 1975. Yeah. in terms of out-of-body experiences. Russell, Charles Tart had done extensive research studies on out-of-body experiences, and other researchers as well. On hallucinogens, they were just gearing up again to begin studying hallucinogens, because in the 1950s, there were tons of peer-reviewed academic articles on LSD, okay?
Yeah.
But now they're doing articles on DMT and articles on psilocybin, the active ingredients in ayahuasca and in magic mushrooms, okay? And in terms of ghosts and spirits, there have been academic articles written about them since the late 1800s. The leaders of psychology, the pioneers of psychology, William James had been fully into that,
Yeah, we're parapsychologists to begin with.
And then, exactly. So, but the only thing that we don't have any academically derived data on was UFO contact. Nothing. Okay. What we had was, pseudoscience based upon hypnotic regressions, which is total BS, and nothing else. And so I said, well, we need to start with, in order for us to begin to compare later on in the future, data on the UFO contact experiencer. So what I wrote was a whole research methodology of how to begin to do an academic research study, comprehensive academic research study on the UFO contact phenomenon. So I wrote out the details. It was 6 pages total. I sent it to Mary Rodwell, Edgar Mitchell, and Rudy Schild. And all of them was like, wow, this is unbelievable. This is great. This is fantastic. We need to move on. And I've got people that I can recommend, to help us. So I got the green light from the 3 of them. And then immediately, a lot of other people started joining this organization, which Mary helped out. She said, Mary, we need a name for this. She said, Ray, why don't you call it FREE, the Foundation for Research on Extraterrestrial Experiences. And then later on, after we had the organization established for about 3 or 4 months, I went to the home of Dr. Edgar Mitchell based upon the suggestion of Rudy Schild that we name it in the honor of Edgar. So in front of Edgar, I remember I have a recording, which I still have. I said, Edgar, Rudy and I would like to know if you're willing to accept naming the organization on your behalf. And the name would be the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation. And so he was humbled and he said, okay, I'll accept it. So that's how the organization got started, the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation.
Love to hear that recording. I'd love to hear it.
I've got it. I'll send it to you.
Yeah, thank you.
And so then at that point, we began to have interest from other academics. The first academic to join us was Dr. John Klimo. Dr. John Klimo was a professor for over 45 years of psychology. He was based out of the Bay Area, a PhD from Brown University. He had been writing tons of articles on consciousness and the paranormal. His most well-known work was a book titled Channeling, which was translated to 18 languages. It's like the Bible if you want to learn about channeling. And that's an academic book. And so he joined us. And then another person that joined us was Dr. Leo Schreiber. Leo was a professor of psychology at the University of Wyoming. And he had been writing about UFO contact experiences since the early 60s, very, very long time. And at that time, I would guess he was in his late 80s, 88, I would guess. He died, maybe I think at the age of 98. But he didn't have a computer. He had snail mail, And so the only way he could join in would be for him to call in to Skype, which we used at that time. And then another person that joined us was, I'm having a mental breakdown here. He's a neuroscientist, Dr. Bob Davis. He had just retired.
We just had him on the show.
Okay, then you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And he's a retired professor of neuroscience. So he joined us maybe like 6 months after we started. And then we had other individuals, Dr. Melton, who had a PhD in psychology. But Mary brought in Kathleen Martin, who had been writing about the abduction phenomenon, and Barbara Lamb, and Denise Stoner. These are all 3 individuals that had been working doing hypnotic regressions on UFO contact experiencers. we brought in Rosemary Ellen Guiley, who had written over 60 books at that time on the paranormal phenomenon.
60? 60
books. She's now deceased. But she had this broad knowledge of the paranormal, not just on UFOs. And so she brought a different perspective to this genre. And then we had another fellow who knew a lot about John Keel. My goodness, my memory's not good today.
John Keel?
John Keel was one of the early UFO researchers. And he had a hypothesis since the early 60s or mid 60s that the UFO phenomenon was not a physicalist phenomenon. It was a consciousness-based phenomenon. And so, oh my goodness, the name just doesn't ring a bell. I apologize.
Yeah, don't worry. We'll put it in the show notes.
But anyway, we had Giorgio Piacenza from Peru, who is an academic, and he had been writing about UFOs and philosophy.
Yeah, you mentioned him before. He was an experiencer as well?
Major experiencer as well.
Yeah.
And so what we did is we then began to have a series of meetings. And the topic of the conversation was, how do you begin to do a research methodology on something that's never been done before? Okay. So over 9 months, we developed the details of a research methodology. And then what we developed was 2 quantitative surveys totaling 660 questions and 1 qualitative survey instrument comprised of written responses to 70 open-ended questions. And then we developed a whole methodology of how to disseminate this. So a lot of our members had their own radio shows, weekly radio shows. Rosemary had her own show. Kathleen Martin, every week she appeared on her show. Mary Rodwell attended numerous shows. And so every week, what we were doing was being pushed out on the air, mainly to shows that focused on the paranormal and on UFOs. We also had a large email list of 8,000 names. On YouTube, we circulated on YouTube that announcement. And so over a 3.5-year period, we wound up with more than 4,350 responses from over 125 countries to our English language survey.
We had a 600 question survey.
660 questions and 70 open-ended questions. And what people were complaining about, it was just too long.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Give me more than 10 questions. I'm going to start getting irate.
Yes. And so in order to take the survey, you have to have seen a UFO, physically seen a UFO, and you have to have had some type of contact with non-human intelligence. It doesn't necessarily have to be a physical contact. It could be a download, telepathic communication, that sort of thing. And so we also developed the questionnaires in several languages. We developed it in Spanish. We received over 1,200 responses to our Spanish surveys.
Out of the 4,000 and change?
No, this is an addition.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So it was 3,200 plus another 1,200. That's 4,200.
Okay.
And then we developed it in German and in Slovak. We also developed, because we had a researcher that was very interested. She was Slovak speaker.
Got it.
So she translated into Slovak. But still, we had 250 responses to the Slovak research. And then we also developed it in Chinese, but we couldn't get enough Chinese researchers that were interested in it. And in French. The 2 French folks we had, they bailed out after a certain period of time because they realized how large this was. And then we had 1 Chinese researcher. And then they said, look, Ray, I need help. This is too much for me. But we couldn't get the additional help.
Yeah.
So it was just those 4 major languages. Wow. And what we found out was that our research data, which again was the world's first attempt to be able to collect information about UFO contact experiences, totally contradicts what is circulating in the field of materialist ufology.
And media.
And the media, you know, what people know about UFOs, because all you hear is just a pure materialist perspective.
What did you find?
Phenomenon.
What were your key takeaways?
Yeah, the key takeaways first of all, we wanted to address this whole issue of whether the experience was positive, negative, and neutral, because that was circulating on all these websites, all these radio shows. And what we found out was that originally, in the beginning, 37% of these individuals view these experiences as negative. Why? Because, as Dr. John Mack explained, there's an ontological shock of the experience. Okay, your whole worldview comes crashing down. Okay, you see a being in front of you, a physical being in front of you. All of a sudden, you're going to be, defecating in your pants. It might have been a neutral experience, but you're totally shocked. And then these related paranormal experiences afterwards, your whole world view is going to turn upside down. So, so what we found out was that the overwhelming majority of these people, 95% of these people, began to have additional experiences. Okay, many of them. Over 40% of the people that took our surveys had more than 20 additional experiences. Between 10 to 40 was an additional 20. So you had a total of 60% of these people had more than 10 experiences. Okay. And then there's other numbers between, 5 to 10, a very large percentage as well. So the people that had the most negativity were the people that had 1 or 2 experiences. And that's it. They never had anything else. The people that had the most positive ratings of their experience were the people that had more than 20 experiences.
When this happens to somebody, it would shatter their beliefs, their worldview.
Yes, and that's what it's meant to. Just like an NDE,
everything.
NDE, OBE, it's an awakening process.
Well, it's not a stretch to assume that for many people, it might not be an opening process. It might be a caving in process. It might make people depressed, angry, moody, broody, suicidal, like all the negative things.
There's a whole intermediary period that you go through all that. But the majority of the people that took our survey, they had their experiences over 20 years ago. Okay, the majority of the folks. And
so this survey was, when did you do the survey? 10 years ago. Is that right?
We started developing it in 2013.
Yeah.
And we closed the survey in 2018. Actually, the end of 2017.
So over a period of 4 years, you were collecting this data?
Yes, so about 4 years.
Like an average of like 1,000 respondents a year. Just ain't bad.
Yeah, it was a lot of responses.
That's 3 a day.
In the very beginning was when we got the vast majority of the surveys.
Sure.
So what we had, I forgot to mention, 2 PhD statisticians in our organization. One was Dr. Russell Scalpone, and he did the majority of the statistical analysis.
Yeah, Rob Davis mentioned him.
Yeah. And then we also had later on, Dr. Raul Valverde, and he's a professor of information sciences in Canada, where you're from, Concordia University.
Yeah, it's Concordia is Montreal, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's Montreal. Yeah. And so one of the things that we did, which is very, very interesting, which is to take a look at the reliability of the data. What Russell did is he put together our survey respondents into 5 geographic areas. One was the US, another one was Canada, another one was Great Britain, another one was continental Europe, and then he grouped Australia and New Zealand together. And what he found out was that there was very minimal deviation as to how they responded to each question, no matter where they lived. So that means the people in the US were responding the same way as the people in continental Europe. Which is absolutely fascinating. And
or maybe not surprising.
No, it's not surprising because it's the same phenomenon. But we still wanted to find that out.
Sure.
He also did a statistical analysis of duration of their experiences and how they rated positivity and negativity of their experience over time. And so what happened was that we started right here at this end with, a certain number. Okay, remember I mentioned 37% viewed it as negative?
Yeah.
But towards the end, it was 96% viewed it as positive. There's only 4% viewed it as negative. Okay,
That's
so
a
it
good
was like
finding.
a steady trend in an upward direction. But in that intermediary, the upward direction, then you're having experiences like myself. You think you're going crazy. You're emotional roller coaster. People are getting divorced because the wife doesn't accept these things or deal with it, or the husband,
Yeah.
And so it is a steady flux of emotional roller coaster during that time. So we asked that question. We asked about 26 questions, whether it was positive, negative, or neutral. And
you kept it short. Only 26. Surprised.
The only 20. Well, we had 660 questions.
Yeah, sure.
And so a question, for example, how would you rate your experiences? Positive, negative, and neutral. That's the one that had 4% as negative.
Right.
This is now when you're taking the survey. We also had a question was initially when your experience first started, and that's where we got the 37%. We had a question, if you could stop your contact experiences now, would you? 96% no. Keep it coming, baby. Keep it coming.
Yeah. So, there's so what I'm sorry, just a quick comment on this. What I'm finding is that there's a thirst. We've spoken to people on the podcast here who've had these experiences, like musicians, artists, scientists, business people. There's a trepidation. Obviously, there's a trepidation. There's a shock, but there's an underlying thirst for people because they've seen, to use your words, they've seen that there is a veil that's been pierced. So here's my question then to you: Why is it that we even have a veil?
Because I think we have certain tasks that we have to do in this reality. And that if we realize that this is an illusion, that we're originally from God, okay, it would be a mass flow to kill ourselves, to return back to God, okay? So it puts us in this veil, and it puts us in a state where material wealth, greediness, material satisfaction, the sex, physical contact, these are things that we long for in this physical reality. So
it sounds it sounds like they're goodies to keep us quiet and calm. It seems deliberate.
It seems deliberate, and that is from the NDE literature. You probably know by now that the most important concept that we learn from the NDE literature when people are told that they need to return. What these individuals state is that when they have a life review, this intelligence, this NDE intelligence that overwhelmingly people are calling it God, tells them is that it's not important how much money you have, it's not important what religion you are, okay, et cetera, et cetera. What is important is that you need to learn how to love. But yet, that's the most difficult task for humanity.
We get caught up. We get caught up in all the other bullshit.
All the other stuff that we're talking about. So, but overall, I think the whole process is as the title of Mary Rodwell's book, Awakening. Okay, that's what all of the contact modalities are all about. It's an awakening because after you've had these experiences, you begin to explore spiritual questions. Everybody of the contact modalities, almost everyone, okay, becomes spiritual. Now, why is that? Okay, you have an NDE, obvious by definition, you become spiritual. You have a UFO contact. Well, we demonstrated that 85% of the people became deeply spiritual, but you wouldn't associate that with UFOs. But our data shows that. Hallucinogenic journeys, the same thing. People become deeply spiritual, out-of-body experiences, astral travel experiences, deeply spiritual individuals. So what these are, it's an awakening for us to understand that we are eternal spiritual beings. And that's how I start off my book, The Mind of God, which I can discuss a little bit more, the intricacies of that later on. But getting back to the main topic of conversation here, we found that
this is all the main topic. This is all the main topic.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, go ahead.
So that was finding number one, that these experiences over time were overwhelmingly positive. Finding number two, these experiences were overwhelmingly transformative. That's what we were talking about before, okay? Individuals became much more spiritual, less materialistic, okay? Became much more friendly to others. Okay. They became much more ecological. They no longer fear death. I mean, we asked over 70 questions on this.
Yeah.
We borrowed it from a book that Dr. Kenneth Ring wrote in 1992, titled, my goodness, all these pills I'm taking for my pain from the operation I had.
Oh yeah, that's right. Oh, you forgot to mention. Well, not forgot to. We thought maybe we didn't need to, but you did. You had a minor surgery at the beginning of the week.
It wasn't minor. It was a major surgery.
Wow. Okay, major. Yes.
So to me, it was major because
yeah,
of the pain.
Of course.
But anyway, I remember now the Omega Project. Okay. Mm-hmm. And in that book, he compared 85 UFO contact experiencers with 85 NDE experiencers. He asked them both the same exact questions. 70 of those questions were, how did they change? How, as individuals over time, they changed in exactly the same way. So I contacted Dr. Ring, and we established a friendship since then. And we asked to utilize his 70 questions in our survey, which we did. We came up with the same exact data.
Wow.
The same exact survey findings. Yeah. To the T. It was like 85% of these people changed, depending on the question that would ask. Some questions was like 95%, some was 75%. Yeah. Overall, it was 85% change to all these 70 questions. For example, they no longer fear death. So what the hell does UFO contact deal with? 80% of them no longer fearing death. Well, the story of the open-ended questions of responding to these 70 questions of their details of their experiences, provides the filling to respond to that.
That's what people are. It seems like what people are really plugging into is more and beyond whatever physical manifestation you saw in front of you or where you were physically, but how that's changed you is what's more profound. And so
that's what it's all about. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, so it goes back to my question. Why are we in a state of unchange? Like, why is it that we are asleep? Why aren't we awake? Like, again, it's the same question as why is there a veil? If we know that there's a veil, why the hell is it there? And why aren't we on the other side?
That's an extremely important question that I've asked for myself. I said, why don't we just give everybody a near-death experience? Just give it to them.
The world would change, boy.
The world would change night and day. Night and day.
Yeah,
okay?
Overnight.
And so, who knows? It's maybe there is a plan, there's a destiny, there's an evolution of how things need to move. But why was I selected? For example.
Well, why do you think you were selected? If selected is the right word?
Well, I don't know if it's the right word, but what I think it was that I was always an organizer. For example, at Berkeley, here I was the first minority student to be accepted into that particular PhD program I was in 8 years, highly selective. But yet I spent most of my time organizing graduate students, minority students, to increase the numbers of minority students at Berkeley. Berkeley is a state institution. It's got state supporting funding. 65% of the residents of California are minorities, okay? But yet it was like 90% of the student body doing PhDs and masters at Berkeley were white. So I was like, what the hell, is going on here? So then I organized students. I led protests, pickets, outside of departments. And we, by the time I left, we had increased in certain departments that we had picketed because the sciences are represented, heavily by whites and Asians. So we didn't focus on the sciences. We focused on the other academic departments. Mm-hmm. But when we left, all of a sudden, political science had a first Black student in 5 years, so it
seems like not to toot your horn, but it seems like you're not happy being the only guy on the other side. You want to bring others over.
Well, I was always an organizer since I was young, even my undergraduate days. For example, at Cornell, I was the third student to be expelled from Cornell University for divestiture of South African funds. Cornell invested in companies that had businesses in South Africa, and South Africa had apartheid. Blacks it was like the South in the US in the 1960s. It was even worse, okay? And so here was Cornell University, major institution, still investing funds in corporations that made money off of apartheid. And so I was part of the large group of students that protested that. So I was the third student expelled from that. So I was always an organizer. I was always able to put people together. And so I guess that's why they selected me. But why in the hell did they wait until I was 53 years old, to do these things,
Well, it sounds like, and this, I've heard other people describe you like this, because you didn't give a shit what people think about you.
I don't give a damn what people think about me.
Yeah,
I am who I am. I'm confident in who I am. I speak in a very laid back, sincere, simple manner. But yet, on the SAT, I could score 1,600 on the SAT if I wanted to. But that's not me.
We started on this before we press record. What or who is God to you, if it exists?
Well, God is what has been discussed since the Upanishads and carried down into later on the Buddhist traditions, the Taoist traditions, all the traditions in the Near Eastern tradition, into the Greek tradition, the Roman tradition, and that is that there is a central intelligence behind all of our reality, that our reality is an illusion, okay? An illusion not in the sense that it doesn't exist. Yes, it does exist because it is physical, but we're not allowed to pierce the veil of that physicality in order to understand our true reality. So God, the way I envision it, is what is behind everything, okay? We are all one, okay? The way I like to think about it is that we are a little neuron that once we get reborn here into this physical reality, okay, that neuron is still attached by a cord to God, okay? But when we die, the neuron travels back to the brain of God, okay? And we rejoin it. And that's why you hear so frequently NDE experiences state that all of a sudden I knew everything. But then all of a sudden when I was returned, I don't remember what it was, but I knew that at one point I knew everything. Same thing with people that do deep meditation, okay? And what happened to Edgar Mitchell, the Samadhi experience, all of a sudden they know everything. It's like all of a sudden, and then all of a sudden it's like it's wiped off from the computer banks,
For those listening and not watching, that auditory that auditory accompaniment is perfect. That was perfect. Completely understood.
And so God has been spoken about in so many different ways. Cosmic consciousness, the mind of God. Dr. Michael Grosso is extensively quoted in Kenneth Ring's book in 1992, The Omega Project, because he speaks about the mind at large. That's the term that he coined, the mind at large, which is the same concept, that everything is all encompassed within the mind at large, within the mind of God. So to me, God is who we really are. We are part of God. There's no detachment. Another way of thinking about it is God is like this huge, gigantic system. That's why some people call it a virtual reality, so they can physically get a hold of the concept, okay, that we are inside a virtual reality. We're living a life that we just don't perceive to be an illusion because we're inside a virtual reality. But what I corrected is that this virtual reality is not this computer mechanized version, as people now understand virtual reality, that this is much, much more profound. And also that this reality is also spiritual, because it deals with you as an individuated unit of consciousness, as a little neuron, okay? And what is your role within the mind of God and your travel within the different dimensional planes. getting to the mind of God. For example, when you have, if I could take at liberty to differentiate between astral travel and out-of-body experiences. Okay. In my book, The Mind of God, I describe that we're living in a 4D reality, the 3 dimensions of space, and then the 4th dimension of space-time. Okay. So within this reality, there's like a concrete shell, the veil that we just don't, we cannot pierce. Okay. But once you have an out-of-body experience, all of a sudden you're floating out of your body, you see your body underneath you, and you're like, oh my God, what's happening, but the out-of-body experience takes place in a physicalist environment. Okay. Everything deals with planet Earth. Whether you want to go to the moon and check out the back of the moon, it's still physical, of your environment. Okay. Now, an astral travel experience is when you pierce that 5th dimension where the OBE takes place. And now you're going into these higher level dimensions. Okay. And in these higher level dimensions is very similar to a near-death experience where you can manifest things. Okay.
And is that where you were when you were you're driving in traffic in your car?
Well, I think it's in these higher levels of dimensions where I was given this information, because it certainly was not the 5th dimension where you're dealing with your physicality, and then, for example, Preston Dennett, hopefully you can interview him later on.
Preston Dennett?
Dennett, Dennett, Preston. And part of him he's an interesting fellow because he clearly, he's one of these major contact experiencers. He's first started by seeing the ghost of his deceased mother. Okay. Then he tells his brother that he saw a UFO video on TV, on CBS News, a very important case in ufology. And then his brother says, oh, last week we saw a UFO, my friends and I. And all of a sudden he calls his friends, Preston called his friends, and he verifies what they all saw. Then he got hooked. And then he joined this organization, MUFON, to do research on UFOs. And then he begins later on to see UFOs and talk to contact experiencers. And so later on, he begins to do out-of-body experiences to train himself to invoke it. He listened to all the Robert Monroe tapes of how to induce an out-of-body experience. So he finally pops out. He has an out-of-body experience. And then he knows that there's something called astral travel experiences when you pop out of the OBE and you go into these higher realms. And so eventually, after I don't know how many times, but numerous times, he finally pops out of his body, but he gets scared to death and he goes right back into his body. And then, but once he manages to control it, what's the first thing he does when he's in this astral travel realm, these higher realms? He yells out, "Mama, Mama," to his deceased mother, who appeared to him as a ghost in his living room many, many years ago. And then he begins to interact with his mother. So it's an environment where you can induce, phenomenon.
Well, we don't have to have Preston on the show. You just gave everything away.
That's right. and also like in a near-death experience where you're seeing these people on a ridge, right? This large group of people, and you say to yourself, "Wow, I wonder what they look like," and boom, you're right there in front of them. You can manifest your intentions in an NDE. So the astral travel phenomenon literally has almost an infinite number of experiences and intelligences that you're interacting with. Some of them are negative, and that's the interesting aspect of it, that even though overwhelmingly it's positive, there is a negative component to it if you do astral travel for many, many years. And most of the major yogis that have managed to control astral travel phenomenon, they will tell you everything that I'm saying. It's not anything new. It's been known since the dawn of mankind, since the Upanishads, the astral travel phenomenon.
So you got me curious by what you just said a moment ago, because I was going to ask you my last question, but this is the second last question. Have you, in your experiences, even before Free, when in 2012, when all this was happening to you, you're talking about intermediaries and other shadow figures and so forth. Did you ever meet or see, witness a malevolent type of being?
Never.
Okay. Just curious.
But I have spoken directly with people which are now close friends of mine. It's commonly known in the paranormal ghost arena as an attachment, where you get this malevolence that attaches to your consciousness.
Wow.
And the closest that I could describe it is that when someone dies and they do not go, into back to God, they decide, their consciousness decides to stay in this physical earthly realm. They attach to individuals that are susceptible, to them. For
Parasitic.
example, that's what they call parasites. That's the term that is used, parasites. And Paul Eno, which you certainly need to get on your show, he studies ghosts and spirits.
Eno?
And Eno, E-N-O, and he's a member of the CCRI organization. He published an article on ghosts and spirits for our book. And so that's what I would say. It's very, very real. Okay. And people have diverse theories as to, this phenomenon, which are known as spiritual attachments.
Funny you say it's very, very real. And I could hear half the people in my life. I could see them roll their eyes at you saying that, including, of course, the past me. But this is all just so fascinating because I can't discount, and nobody can discount anybody's subjective experience. And you obviously lived through fantastical ones, if I can say that, in that period of time. And I would never discount listening to that because there's always an opportunity to learn and to gather information. Always to gather information.
I never dismissed outright an experiencer. And for example, there was one elderly lady, her name is Ruth Ann Friend. I and a documentary crew were doing a documentary over 5 years we've been filming, titled A Greater Reality, One Man's Journey of Discovery. And there we interviewed more than 25 PhD academics and medical doctors and more than 50 experiencers of the contact modalities. And usually these people have had everything. They've had near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences. They've seen UFOs. They've seen ghosts, major experiencers. And so what we're doing is exactly what our research at CCI is doing, making the relationship between consciousness and the contact modalities. So anyway, this lady, Ruth Ann Friend, we were 2 days at her home in Illinois. And in my head, I at the end, I didn't accept her because it was just so crazy, her experiences. It makes me look like a joke, my experiences. And hers is like a lifetime. But yet she's so natural, so sincere, whatever. So at the end, we were about to leave at 10:30 at night. And I said, "Oh, Ruth Ann, you were supposed to give me a psychic reading." She goes, "Oh, but Ray, I usually do that in the morning. And all day I've been traveling with you. We've been doing the interviews. I'm so tired." That's just 5 minutes for the camera, something real quick, right? So anyway, in 5 minutes, she didn't do one psychic reading. She did 3. And it was about my wife, my daughter, and my father. And all of them were home runs. Just to get one was a home run.
And you got that on camera too?
On camera, we got it. And I was like, and what that was I think that was a message to me saying, look, Ray, this woman is for real. Okay.
Yeah. And you don't really need proof. You asked for it, here it is, but you don't need it.
Here's the proof. But now I am so after that experience, I'm still skeptical, of it all, because there's certain people I know of BS, artists,
of course.
I still have that component of it, but initially I don't rule it out. I have to go through a whole process of digesting the phenomenon.
Wow.
So anyway, that's just 2 of the findings. There were like numerous other findings, but the other one was that these experiences were overwhelmingly paranormal in nature, okay, and not physical. While you saw a physical UFO, you might have seen a physical being. 95% of your experiences were quote unquote paranormal in nature. Just some numbers: 80% had out-of-body experiences. 50% were brought to another multi-dimensional reality like I was. 67% saw ghosts. Out of those, another 60% actually communicated with that ghost, okay? Orbs, another 2/3 physically saw orbs. Had objects move around the house, like commonly known in poltergeist activities, another 2/3, okay? I could go on, you name it, the paranormal. Telepathic communications, 78% had telepathic communications. Okay, I could go on and on. You name the paranormal phenomenon, in huge numbers, these people had it. And so that's why we concluded was that this experience was overwhelmingly a psyche, consciousness-based phenomenon and not a physicalist phenomenon. But yet the field of materialist ufology is totally clueless of what I just told you, totally clueless.
Yeah.
Once they see the word consciousness in our book, beyond, as the title of our first book was Beyond UFOs, the science of consciousness and contact with non-human intelligence. Once they see that word consciousness, they run away like it's a plague. Okay. And that's why these people remain totally clueless as to the complexities of the phenomenon.
We'll put your survey results, your books, all in the show notes. So I want to make sure we don't miss any of it. So you and I will talk about all the links that we need to share, so the listener can research as well. And if you have that documentary as well, or if you have that film, that'd be great too, if you can share that.
We have the trailer of it. It's a 4-minute trailer.
Oh,
and
perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll put that up. So last question now. What is greatness to you?
Greatness. Greatness is the ability to learn how to love.
So succinct. I didn't expect you to be so succinct with that answer. How can you disagree?
Yeah, that's the task of why we were brought down here. We need to master the ability to learn how to love, but yet it's the most difficult task. So greatness to me is someone that has mastered the ability to love.
I think if we learn how to love, that veil would disappear. I think we would have a better understanding of better understanding of our neuron selves and the connections that we have.
Most definitely. We then begin to understand that we are eternal spiritual beings, and that we might die physically, we still remain part of God.
Ray, it's been an incredible pleasure. Thank you. Thank you again. Thank you for sharing your stories in detail. I mean, I certainly appreciate it. I'm sure the listener has. And thank you for your dogged approach to learning and completing that mission as Edgar Mitchell had asked you to do. Thank you.
Most definitely. Thank you. You're very welcome.
Hey, it's Enrico Colantoni here, actor, director, and dedicated napper. Like what you heard today? Make sure to subscribe to Behind Greatness and share with your friends. And consider donating to help us produce more great conversations at behindgreatness.org/donate. Until next time.